Now, I'd just like to draw attention to how swollen my eyes are before someone's like, you look really tired, because actually I'm ill. So feel sorry for me. Oh, my flatmate's watching. Hi. Hi, girl. Awesome. Really excited about this one. Someone out with a bubble, which is nice.
Hi.
Hello!
Hey. How are you?
I'm ill. How are you?
I'm not ill. Well, kind of not ill, as you know. I'm
Yeah.
good. I'm good. I'm good as the answer. I hope you feel better soon.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not that ill. I should be fine in a day, I imagine.
Good. That's good to know.
Good, good. How are you? How was your day?
My day's been full of hospitals and things, but I found a surgeon that I love, so I'm very happy. And got a plan. Yay, plans are good. So yeah, it's things are happening. You can see all my lovely books. Things are happening, which is good. So moving forward, which is exciting, and busy with work. And I'm kind of surprised that it's already the middle of October. I'm not sure how it happened, but it's all
That's pretty scary. It's
it
a
is.
scary, scary thought. So a lot of people won't know who you are. So do you want to just give a little background into who you are and what you do? Yeah,
Sure.
basically.
So I'm Turl, and I'm a nutritional scientist. I originally went to medical school to become an oncologist, and my mother had breast cancer when I was doing my BSc, my intercalated BSc, and I realized that being an oncologist was not a good job for me. So that's when I started looking into nutrition and lifestyle, particularly with cancer, and then I decided to do a master's in nutritional medicine. And I'm a nutritional scientist. So that's halfway between I guess, a clinical nutritionist and also a nutritional therapist. So I have both kind of aspects to my work. I do a lot of writing and consulting for food and health brands, and I do see patients as well. And I've literally just finished the functional medicine course. So now I'm a certified functional medicine practitioner, which is very exciting. And I think it's going to be the future of medicine, where they are looking at what is the root cause of disease and how do we treat that and go upstream rather than just treating the symptoms, which is what we currently do in our medical system. And we're very reliant on pharmaceuticals when a lot of things actually can be changed from what we eat, our lifestyle, sleep, exercise, and that kind of brings us really back to today, really.
Yeah, so I guess more focusing on prevention rather than
Yeah,
cure.
exactly. And I think that we're, as human beings, we've evolved so much, so quickly. Well, our lifestyles have evolved so much so quickly, but our bodies haven't. And I think that's what we have to remind ourselves, that whilst the world suddenly, even if you think about 100 years ago, if our grandparents, when they're born, the world is unrecognizable. The food that we eat, all these gadgets, the fact that we're videoing on a phone, they would never understand that.
Yeah.
And that we don't walk, there's hardly any manual labor anymore. So the world has changed a lot.
Yeah, and I guess evolution as such hasn't caught up with that.
We just can't, because evolution happens over tens of thousands of years, and the change that happened really of the industrial revolution have only been about 200 years. So yeah,
Yeah, so nothing in the grand
nothing in
scheme.
the grand scheme of things, absolutely nothing.
So one thing that stuck out to me on your blog, and one thing that I think is going to be really interesting for everyone, is what I just posted. I'm sure you saw it. So I guess like tips or, well, you will have seen it, and I'm sure this is probably your biggest, I don't know, irritation on the internet, is these people that, maybe suggest that cancer can be cured by going on a certain diet, or that you don't need to do chemo, you could just, I don't know, cut out carbohydrates and that will starve the cancer. And it's almost like preying on people that have very little hope.
I think
And it's kind
there is a lot of like quacks out there. I think there's some things which has got some evidence. It's just how do you prove it? So I think firstly, let's just talk about some of the diets. Like, just for you, all of you to know, and I'm going to be really open about this, is I had breast cancer when I was 29. I have got a reoccurrence right now. And it's really interesting. The minute you say that, everyone thinks they can give you a cure. People who have no science education feel that they can give you a cure because everyone eats. And it's something that we all have to do to stay alive. So I think there are a lot of cracks. And I think people are also desperate. It is a disease that affects 1 in 2 of us at some point in our life. So there's a lot of opportunity for people who are unscrupulous to get involved. So things like the ketone, like ketosis, which is basically when you have a very low carb diet and you really strip down to maybe 5%, 10% of your calories coming from carbohydrates. There are some hormonal changes that potentially could happen that could help support cancer slowing down in some types of cancer, but it's not fully proven. And it's something that we're still debating as scientists. And that is one of the few actually that I'm a bit like, I will go away and research as more and more evidence comes out. But if you look at Dr. Volta Longo's work, there is some interesting, I guess, statistics and evidence coming out of that. Some of these other ones where you're like, oh, just give up all sugar, just do this, just do that, have 100 grams of like turmeric a day, you know, it doesn't work. And I think we have to really look at the sensible things. But food has a huge part in disease, and what we eat and the biochemistry of how that interacts with our own bodies can really either help to feed our disease or help to cure us, really, essentially, keeping it in really simple terms. I think
one of the touched on, which is really important, is that, you know, we often wrongly sort of speak about cancer as one disease. And, you know, even within breast cancer, there's various forms of breast cancer and they all behave completely differently and the treatments would be completely different. And actually the effects of, so for example, even exercise for most cancers would be beneficial, but for some of the growth hormones could, in theory, feed the cancer growth. So each cancer can behave in completely different ways. So there's no one, it wouldn't be like, oh, it's never going to be, keto is good for all cancers.
No, it just depends, on your body. And I think cancer is really a group of diseases where cells are growing out of control. As you said, everyone's really different. Even let's talk about breast cancer, for example. Some of them are hormone driven, some of them are not, some are just random mutations, some are genetic. There's so many different types of cancers. And I think to lump them all together would do a disservice, not just to the people that research cancer, but also to the type of disease that it is. I mean, essentially, it's a pathway in your body that's not working, because cells actually have something called programmed cell death, where they grow and they live for a certain amount of time, and then when they are not working correctly, they actually kill themselves. And the cancers, when those pathways are not working, so they don't kill themselves, or they just grow exponentially. So that's essentially, in a nutshell, what cancer is.
What's the cool word for it? Apoptosis.
Apoptosis, yeah. I really like that word. There's a lot of pathways that could happen with as well. So again, there's not just one pathway for that programmed self, that there's so many different ways.
Yeah, so coming back to that post, which was about, I guess, evidence-backed ways that your diet can influence or protect you against potentially.
So that work was done by, it was collated by a lot of research done by the World Cancer Research Fund and the American Institute of Cancer Research. And they have centers around the world. They have one in Amsterdam, in Hong Kong. And they looked at some of the studies, which were epidemiological studies, where they followed people for a really long period of time, men and women, and kind of followed what they ate, what their food diet, and whether or not they got cancer. And again, with some of those, they also followed them after they had cancer to see whether it reoccurred or not. And actually, my master's thesis, was actually on looking at diet and lifestyle and how that can prevent cancer reoccurrence. And there are some bits of evidence. So I think one of the things that you looked at, I think that you posted, was about weight. So obesity, and I know that cancer research have got that very scary poster about obesity causing cancer, but that's actually not true. What obesity can do is increase your risk of cancer, and there are various mechanisms for why that is. If you look at something like breast cancer, for example, that is about to do with their levels of hormones. So the more body fat you're carrying, one of the mechanisms potentially could be that you have a lot more estrogen in your system, and some breast cancers grow in response to estrogen. So that's one of the things. With other forms of obesity, for example, and other cancers, it's because it depends exactly where the fat is. So there's two kind of main types of body fats that you want to look at. It's basically the one that's the subcutaneous, which is around this underneath the skin, and then there's also then the one which is visceral, which is around your organs. That is definitely more dangerous. Not that subcutaneous is good, but it's a little bit more manageable. And the other thing that's happened as we become, and there's some amazing work from Dr. Gabrielle Lyon in the States from this, is as we become less active as humans, and you're like this, Emma, we've started to get more fat cells in our muscles because we don't even exercise. So the metabolic, the muscle is one of the most metabolically active organs in our bodies. And we've got to the point where we've got fat in our muscles, which is terrifying.
Yeah, so I guess the effect of that as well is that the muscle becomes less insulin sensitive.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And insulin is very related. Exactly, to all these cancers and so many diseases. It's not just diabetes. Insulin resistance is, been related to cognitive health and all sorts of things. And I think it's only now that we're starting to understand the effect of all of these, how it's almost a web, how each hormone affects another hormone or another system. So it could be that it affects, insulin, but that affects your sleep, that affects your adrenals, that affects your stress relief, all of those things. And I think that's interesting. I think alcohol is one of the other ones. Do you have any question about that before I kind of move on?
No, I was just going to say it's never as simple as, I think in fitness where a lot of us have a very basic understanding of things like insulin is good or insulin is bad, and it's never that simple. And the same with, we look at sort of people throw around hormones like cortisol is bad because it's a stress hormone, but actually it can be good in some senses settings. So from exercise, acute levels of cortisol are required to adapt to exercise, but on a chronic level, obviously that can be bad, and it just depends on so many factors. And I think, it's almost a case of knowing a little bit is dangerous, and then you realize how little you know.
I'm always really fascinated when nutritionists or scientists or personal trainers basically say they know all. I've been studying nutrition for nearly 20 years now, and I can honestly say I know that much, and there's so much more to learn because we're researching, finding so much out each year. It's an area that we didn't focus on before, what we put in our bodies and how that affected all our hormone systems, how did it affect our insulin system, how did it affect all our organs. We're only starting to get to it's the tip of the iceberg, actually.
Interesting, I guess, more and more now, the microbiome, which I will admit I know absolutely nothing about. Every time I open like a science journal or, something pops up, it's this is affecting the microbiome, or, some new, like this part of your diet could influence this, and maybe artificial sweeteners are doing something, and all these other factors. So it's, I guess we're always learning new things and how they're affecting us in different ways.
So with the gut microbiome, I think it's probably an area that maybe we didn't understand 50 or 100 years ago, but we ate in a way that supported our gut microbiome. So our gut microbiome is all the bacteria, good and bad, and the fungi and the protozoa and all the other viruses and all the things that live in our digestive system. We also have microbiomes on our skin, on our mouth, and all those areas. And actually what's really clever, it's almost like the gut microbiome is like our second brain. It actually produces 90% of our serotonin, which is our kind of the beginning of our happy hormone. It's the base of tryptophan, which is the thing that makes us feel happy. Actually digests a lot of our food. So some of these long chain carbohydrates, we're not able to digest them, and the gut the gut microbiome, the bacteria, the beneficial bacteria, digest them for us. They make vitamins for us. They make cell signaling molecules. It's a first line of defense for the immune system. It's just really clever, and we need the gut microbiome. The gut microbiome needs us. We live in symbiosis with it. So if you think about the Amazon as a jungle, and it's full of different trees, different plants, and different insects, and different frogs, and different all sorts of things. It's a really, really, really fragile ecosystem. And if you allow one thing to grow too much, so let's say you allow one tree that's really huge to grow too much, and it stops the light getting to the smaller plants and trees, and that means that some of the birds can't feed on these smaller things, and then they die, and things like that. It really changes, and the same with our gut microbiome. And so if we're not eating the right kind of food, or if we have antibiotics because we're ill, or if we've got some other type of issues, something can overgrow it, something that, and we may not be able to make enough of the right molecules that we need for our system. So maybe it's a bacteria that makes some sort of cell signaling molecule, or digests. One of the things that's really important is it digests all these plant fibers into something called short chain fatty acids. Those are really important for cell signaling, but also for our brain, So what we can eat affects our cognitive health and our brain. And there's way more that goes, 90% information goes from our gut to our brain. From our brain down to our gut, there's only maybe like 10%. And that for me is fascinating. And we know when you have a gut instinct about something and you're not sure about something, that's your gut.
Well,
And I just trust it now. You know what? It's better than me. It's cleverer than me. Trust it.
Yeah. But that's so interesting as well that, you know, we know that what we eat can affect our mood, but we normally sort of think about it more as, I guess, how we perceive food. So if we perceive food as bad, we might feel bad after eating it, or if we perceive food as good, we might feel good after eating it. But there might actually be a sort of physiological or chemical response that's, you know, that when we eat foods that's actually good for our body or good for our microbiome, that is making us feel better. And you were talking about serotonin levels. Like, is there, you know, potentially foods that we could be eating or should be eating that is actually going to make us feel better?
Absolutely. And I think, and it doesn't mean it's going to happen instantly. Sometimes it can. So it's like eating turkey. Turkey's got lots of tryptophan. So yeah, it can make you sleepy. It also can, you know, can make you feel more relaxed. It can make you feel a little bit happy because you're more relaxed. So that's, you know, just one example of a type of food that acts quite quickly. But if you think about, there's some really, it was World Mental Health Day on yesterday. And you look at the diets that they've researched, and there's some really interesting research going on at King's and lots of other universities. And the diet that seemed to be the best for depression was the Mediterranean diet. So what's the Mediterranean diet? Loads of vegetables, nuts and seeds, some oily fish and some other fish, little dairy, little meat. Sorry?
Olive oil.
Olive oil, red wine.
Thing. Actually, I wanted to ask you about this. So I went to a talk a while ago, and it was by a cardiologist, and he gave out some advice at the end, and one of it was, you know, this was generic to everyone, and I'm pretty sure it was 6 tablespoons of olive oil a day, which I obviously went back and worked out was like over 700 calories, which, you know, for someone who, well, actually, for any sort of vaguely inactive female, your typical woman who's 5'5" and works an office job, that's, you know, close to half of their calorie needs.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's a little bit like, well, I would say definitely too much of your calories to be putting on that. And also,
for us, yes, absolutely.
Because most people are, you know, generally, if you're looking at that average female, they're going to be overweight already. So if you're then adding into their diet this excessive amount of fat, I thought even if it is, you know, healthy fat, it's sort of an area where a lot of us trip up because we think, oh, we can eat as much avocado or olive oil as we want because this is good fat and it's going to be good for us, but it doesn't mean the calories don't count as well.
And I think that's the interesting thing. The people that live in the blue zones, these are the areas, there are 5 areas in the world where they're really famous for the, you know, the length people live. So there are a lot of centenarians there. But if you look at those people, they're not overweight, and they do eat a lot of olive oil, but it's because they're constantly moving. They're absolutely constantly moving. They don't have little stress, and they're really, but you know, they often live up and down hills, so they're up and down, and they swimming. They're constantly on the move. We don't have that kind of lifestyle here. I mean, there's a lot of people who are, I'm trying to think what the phrase is, but they might go to the gym for an hour, but the rest of the time they're completely sedentary, and that's not healthy either. So we have to look at our activity levels. It's actually even more important now looking at disease and metabolic to increase your muscle and decrease amount of body fat more than ever, and then think about adding all these things in. And there's so much we can do. I mean, there's so many different things. You know, we can work on the gut microbiome. We look insulin resistance. We can, you know, it's constantly something to look at. But I think,
sorry, I'll ask you a specific question about that. I do think it's because even I don't know a lot, but I'm confused by, you know, someone will be like, oh, well, you need to keep your microbiome healthy and in check. Okay, I get that, and from my interpretation that just means eating, you know, a varied diet, lots of fruit and veg, and that would sort of cover your bases. But is there anything that, you know, specifically we should be eating or not eating? Or obviously probiotics would help, but again, probably coming from food rather than supplements, would you say? Or
there's a couple of things. So firstly, when we say a wide variety of fruit and vegetables, this is, we look at 25 or 30 a week, different types. Most people in the UK certainly don't eat that. I am one of the few people, that's because I'm constantly cooking and buying things. I love it. But also that includes herbs, it includes different salad leaves, you know, all sorts of things, fruits and things. But we don't eat that. And that is, we need to keep that variety, because just like we have our favorite food, every single type of, you know, bacteria or whatever in the microbiome has its favorite food. And we want to feed all those beneficial bacteria and things its favorite food. So that's one thing. Second thing is,
sorry, 30 different fruit and vegetables.
and there's been some studies on that week. Yeah, I mean, that we were talking about at the Royal Society of Medicine on Tuesday. Really interesting.
Oh, yeah, after this, I'm going to have a look at that.
I will email you some stuff.
Yeah.
The next thing is fermented foods. So if we think about our grandparents, and not everyone had fridges. So how do they keep food? They fermented things, they canned things, they bottled things, and that meant that it had some amount of bacteria in it, and that can help populate our gut microbiome with bacteria. So that's a good thing.
Sort of fermented foods be?
Yeah, things like sauerkraut, kimchi, even yogurt is fermented, sourdough is fermented. All of these things are fermented foods. Beer is actually fermented.
Sourdough.
Yeah. And cheese and all sorts of stuff. So how do you get good bacteria? And I think reading Tim Spector's any of his books on diet myth is really interesting, because it really talks a lot about which foods you can have. I think, again, that's something we'd forgotten about for ages. We've become very clean, and we wanted, yeah, our milk was pasteurized and this and that. You know, having unpasteurized milk from a farm near you, amazing. Like having yogurt that's made, that hasn't had starch added, but it's just made traditionally with bacteria, is perfect. Probiotic use. Sorry, go on.
Things just looking at me, and this is how much of a geek I am, but the allergy explosion in
Yes.
science, and that's sort of kind of what you're touching on, is that like we clean everything, everything's like, you know, gone through factories. There's no like dirt, so we don't build it up as much of an immune response, and I guess that you don't have these sort of antibodies to things, and you don't have that same response system in your immune system that maybe we did a couple hundred years ago.
Not just a couple of hundred years, think about 40 or 50 years ago. So even 30 years ago, I'm a bit older than you, but children nowadays, way more food allergies, way more eczema, way more asthma, because they don't play outside, they don't grow their own vegetables, everything's they've used some sort of antibacterial cleaner. And this is not good. Our body, as you said, does not have the opportunity to build up resistance. And also, then when it hasn't got anything else to work on, it starts working on itself. So a lot of these diseases are sort of almost the body attacking itself, autoimmune diseases. And I think we forget that allergies some of them are like that. And we have to really think about, what are we doing to avoid, what are the things we're putting. And actually, I was talking to a brand today, Microbiz, and they do a really interesting range of home cleaners which have got bacteria in them. And so they've got bacteria essential oils, and then you dilute them, and it means that they're almost using the good bacteria to fight the bad bacteria, which I think is really clever. And it's very better for the environment.
Like, remember as well that things like flu jabs and things work because they're giving you a little bit so that you can create these antibodies, and you can create your immune system to fight that. And yeah, so it is interesting, you know, that if you see your kids playing in the mud, like, yeah, okay, they might be a bit dirty, and like I was always allowed to play and get horrendously dirty all the time. Like, that's probably a good thing to let your kids do that. And
100%.
Actually, on up was one on breastfeeding, and that's part of
yeah, and actually, I'm going to touch on antibiotics in a minute, but I'm going to go back to breastfeeding. So breastfeeding is a really great way of protecting against breast cancer, particularly, but also for long-term health, because the mother shares her microbiome with the baby. You don't get those protective antibodies, you don't get those protective bacteria from bottle milk, from bottle-fed children, rather. The other thing is, depending how you're born, if you're born vaginally or cesarean, so a lot of your microbiome comes from when you're born in the birth canal or when your mother delivers you. So there are a lot more children born by cesarean section now, so they miss out on having that natural immunity, again, from their mum. You know, so you get a lot of bifidobacteria. That's the bacteria you get from the birth canal, and then from your mother breastfeeding you. So that's really important.
So how long would you have to breastfeed to sort of get, obviously, probably the longer the better, but I know that especially right at the start is really important. Like, is there say a woman didn't want to breastfeed, but they were like, right, I do want to get, you know, the best out of this. Is there a certain amount of time where you could be like, okay, you know, it would be better to do longer, but at least after, say, a couple of months? Or
I think they don't know is the answer to that. I think it's $1 million question at the moment. I think a minimum of 6 weeks, from what I understand from the literature. It's not easy breastfeeding. There's so many barriers to it. They don't, and also a lot of people have never held a baby or known what to do with a baby these days before they have a baby. Whereas before, people grew up in sort of larger families, they had maybe older brothers and sisters, they've had, you know, cousins and things. So I think that's part of the barrier. Obviously 3 months would be a great start, 6 months even better. But there's been some interesting research again, like children who are weaned early at 4 months are less likely to have food allergies. So I'm quite interested in what's the, you know, behind this research. It's stuff I've been reading recently. And actually, by weaning children at about 4 or 5 months, this whole NHS guideline thing about waiting for 6 months, maybe that's not right, because we've got way more children with food allergies. And if you expose them again a little bit younger, they won't create antibodies when they do eat the food. Their bodies will accept that food is a food to eat. So they won't have so many people with nut allergies. Like some schools, they don't allow so many things. It's crazy. So I think that's one thing. The other thing is everything in our environment has some sort of antibacterial. So if you think about our food, and I'm really passionate about this topic, a lot of meat in this country and the Western world, particularly even more in the United States, we're lucky Europe protects us. Well, until March and Brexit. And yeah, we won't talk about that. But so much of our food has antibiotics. So if you look at chicken, so chickens which are not free range and organic actually as well, and they're not running around, but particularly free range, the ones which are caged, they live such close quarters that they pretty much are all infected with something. So they just give all of them routinely antibiotics. So that feds into the chicken, then we eat it. So when you see these cheap chicken fillets, there's a few companies, I would love to name them, but a lot of fitness people eat them because they can buy 25 of them for a very small price. Anyway, that is obviously full of antibiotics. Those particular ones can massively affect your gut microbiome, killing off many of your good beneficial bacteria, which means you're constantly fighting a battle. Pigs are routinely given, again, like pigs which are not reared outdoors, again, are routinely given antibiotics because they're squished together in little pens. So looking at animal welfare is really important too, because the better you look after your animals, so that's cows and pigs and chickens, and they're outside, they're roaming, they're more likely to be healthy, they're less likely to have infections, they're less likely to be given antibiotics. So actually, again, going back to the Mediterranean diet, the meat is almost like a condiment. So it's mainly plant-based, plant-focused, and then lots of fish, and then a little bit of meat to flavor the food. And people were poor in the Mediterranean until recently, so that kind of makes sense. But then actually, why maybe they've grown up to be healthier because they didn't face all this intensive farming with antibiotics. And I think that's something, our milk, it's everywhere. So for me, I'd rather eat a little bit of good quality, organic, free-range meat and poultry and dairy for this reason, because the gut microbiome is our first defense to everything.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that, well, I guess a barrier actually to sort of adopting a more Mediterranean diet, which we have seen has huge health benefits for numerous things, is that it is quite expensive to eat here in that way, because there's not a lot of fresh fruit and vegetables. And yeah, like you were saying, maybe we should be eating slightly less meat, maybe more fish. Maybe that would be a cheaper option to get that in. But even, I don't know, like, do you need to buy the expensive olive oil? Because that's really quite expensive, especially if you're having 6 tablespoons a day, which maybe is dubious. But
I mean, I think having good quality, like extra virgin olive oil, it is good. That's got the more antioxidants and the polyphenols. So from a health benefit, yes. I actually think the Mediterranean is cheaper because you have less processed food. You're relying a lot on lentils and beans, which when you buy them dry are incredibly well priced. You're not eating loads of bread. If you eat seasonally, so for me, I'm like, get a veg box because they're often really cheap. So Odd Box is brilliant. They use all these slightly odd shaped fruit and vegetables which are rejected from normal, and they're really good quality. In fact, you can get like a medium box, I think $13.50. It's supposed to feed like 3 people for a week. And it was amazing. And I was just like, oh, wow, that's really good. So I think also going to your local fruit and vegetable market, I think that's brilliant. And I think we've become so used to everything being in the supermarket all year round. We've forgotten what seasonal eating is. If you eat seasonally, that food is way cheaper because it's much cheaper to produce. So eating apples at this time, yeah, brilliant. Eating them in like, actually in March, not so good. Eating asparagus,
At the moment, apples are so cheap.
so cheap.
Where later in the year, they're not. And also, you know that. Oh, now we're talking about like environmental problems, but you know that they're coming from like they've come from South Africa for you to eat. Like, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, so eat something else. And yeah, we are going to import some fruit because we're not a hot country and some things won't grow. So we're not going to grow pineapples here, for example. But just think consciously. So for me, asparagus is the biggest problem. Asparagus, we have the best asparagus, some of the best green asparagus in the world. And in Tesco, they had it in May, which is asparagus season from flown over Peru. And that's crazy because it's causing desertification in Peru. And we're not even getting tasty. It doesn't taste of anything. And then you get this amazing tasty asparagus. And then you can buy, like I shop in Borough Market sometimes because I'm lucky I live there. And I get, everyone thinks it's really expensive. But you go there and you're literally buying like 3 bunches of asparagus for like £1. And it's crazy. So again, if you look in shops seasonally, also make a load of tomato sauce when it's in season and put it in the freezer. Buy things and freeze them. Like I'm all for like fruits.
I mean, you're totally right. And you know, when I was saying that the Mediterranean diet is more expensive, I think like that was one of the things that came up at this talk. Someone that, and it is if you're trying to eat in a way that we usually eat. So if you're eating on the go and you need to buy, you know, these things as you're going in very small packets and like ready-made maybe, or you know, at your convenience. But if you make some effort, it's definitely not more expensive. And if you're, you know, pre-making some meals instead of eating out, yeah, your weekly food shop might have been more expensive, but what you spend on food in the whole is much cheaper. I'm
also one for batch cooking as well. So make up like cook a load of lentils, cook a load of veg. So I have a kind of a Sunday night meal prep, and actually that's something we could talk about. It's just I just prepare loads of vegetables during the week. Whatever random vegetables I end up with, and I don't always know what I'm going to cook with it. But I will chop them up, I will roast them, I will blanch them, I will just get them ready so that they're in the fridge. And it makes it much easier to eat more veg, like 2 or 3 portions at each meal. So I'll shred up some cabbage, I'll always make some salad dressings. And I think, again, as you say, it's about being prepared. It's like any type of meal prep. It's like once you're prepared, it's much easier to eat more of the right things. If you come home and you've got nothing in the fridge and you're hungry, it's easy to just order something in or pick something up, and that's not as healthy. And I think part of, I guess, the Mediterranean lifestyle is people cook from scratch and they grow vegetables and things like that. And I know we can't all do that, but I'm not adverse to. I love Lidl. I think Lidl and Aldi have some of the best fruit and vegetables, and they're really seasonal. Like you don't know what you're gonna get. You have absolutely no idea what you're gonna get, but it's great.
Aldi have like a Super Six, so like every week it's like 6 different vegetables, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that gives you variety, and you can just eat whatever's cheapest that week.
Exactly. And Lidl's the same. I mean, they don't have Super Six, but they have a load of stuff, and it's all pretty seasonal. A lot of it's grown in the UK, and I just think it's really. In fact, I met a buyer of Lidl recently, and he was saying that they go and look, and they're literally actively wanting to work with British farmers to see what they can grow. And I thought that was really interesting, really exciting. So that's where I think we've got confused. Also, keep things like. I always have peas and sweet corn, in the freezer. I have frozen berries in the freezer. I have all sorts of stuff.
So frozen fruit and veg, like, is that fine?
Amazing. It's actually sometimes better in higher nutrients because they've picked it and frozen it immediately. By the time they've shipped some of this stuff around the country to wherever it's come from, it's lost some of its nutrients. If you look at vitamin C, is a really great measure of how many nutrients it has because it's the one vitamin that breaks down very quickly. So they've done some really good experiments on broccoli where they've looked at if it's picked seasonally, like in March. I mean, if it's picked in March or October, which is when it's supposed to be in season, the October one always has more nutrients than the one in March. So again, like frozen broccoli, if it's picked at the right season, it's going to be much cheaper and it's going to be for more nutrients. And again, they looked at conventional versus organic, and organic always has more nutrients. So again, we don't know what all these pesticides and things are doing to our body. There's been loads of research now that actually we're just inundating our body with so many chemicals it actually doesn't know what to do anymore. So that's where the food you eat can really has an effect on your biology.
Yeah, hugely. And I think that's something, I guess that's what this whole sort of conversation was going to be based around, is that in fitness anyway, we're very much be in a calorie deficit, lose some body fat, do a bit of exercise, off you pop. And for some people, that simplicity is quite helpful if they've got a lot of body fat to lose. But we often miss out on, what exactly you should be eating. And I'll put my hands up and say I've definitely been one that has said too much. Oh, it's completely your preference. Do what suits you. And I think that's a large compartment, or a large part of it if you're trying to lose body fat. But it's very, I guess too simplistic. Like, there are certain nutrients that you do want to get in. You do want to get a variety of foods in. And I guess sometimes we get caught up in weighing the benefits of, okay, you're actually carrying a huge amount too much body fat. What's going to be of better benefit to you, losing that body fat or eating these foods? And obviously we want a mixture of both. But
Absolutely.
yeah, I think what the calorie deficit is the be all and end all.
No, so I think that's where if it fits your macros, IFYM does not work. And I think that sometimes you can damage your body by eating, let's say you're eating chicken and broccoli, and poor broccoli is having a bad rap today. Broccoli is amazing for you, by the way. Chicken and broccoli every day, you're not getting the variety of nutrients, and that's why you can often get ill when first of all, you're in a calorie deficit anyway, so your immune system may not be working as well. So you want the variety even more than ever, just to make sure that you're working optimally, your hormones are working optimally, your body's working, your immune system's working optimally, your gut microbiome is looked after, because you're already in a calorie deficit. So your body's always having to work a little bit harder. So that's where really looking at eating a wide variety of foods is really important. And I think, sometimes it's really important. Like, at the moment, they're doing a load of studies where they're asking type 2 diabetes patients to have a low calorie, 800 calorie diet with like soups and such. I mean, I disagree with it because I think that it's not sustainable. Anything that's not sustainable weight loss wise, even if it's for a short time, it doesn't work. So I think it's about educating people to make lots and lots and lots of small changes. And I get that for fitness, you think, okay, I'll eat 1,600 calories, great. But then you've got to plan whether you're getting all your essential nutrients. So that's, are you getting a wide variety of amino acids from different foods? Are you getting a wide variety of micronutrients? So the macronutrients fuel your body. The micronutrients fuel your metabolism and how it works. And I think that's where a lot of fitness trainers don't ever focus on that. It's no point you being in calorie deficit if you're constantly cold and you're sick, because that's not going to help you to build muscle. It's just your body's just fighting all the time with infections and things like that. And I think that's where we have to really think about long-term health. What does long-term health mean?
That is really interesting, and I kind of agree with, as much as the research on very low calorie diets and type 2 diabetes is interesting and it creates amazing headlines, like, you can reverse type 2 diabetes in 2 weeks on a 600 calorie a day diet. Like, yeah, that's great, but like, have you taught them to eat? Like, can they sustain that? All these things that you've just touched on. And another point I want to make is, can you, and obviously this isn't ideal, but say we're looking at typical bodybuilder who's eating a very standard diet, so same thing every day, not much variation. Does taking a multivitamin help? Obviously it's not as good as a variety of fruit.
No, because they're not getting the plant fiber. The plant fiber is what your beneficial bacteria, your gut microbiome requires to make all those things that we need. That makes vitamins, cells, signaling molecules, the short-chain fatty acids. Secondly, levels of vitamins and things, when you take them as a supplement, sometimes you don't always absorb everything you require. Sometimes you basically pee it out. So whereas if you're having it regularly in food, you absorb it because you can only absorb so much from external sources. So I think that's one thing to remember. Is it going to help a little bit? Of course it is. If you're suboptimal levels of zinc, then great. I take a magnesium supplement because I exercise a lot, and even though I have a really good diet, I know that from amount of training I do, and our food is not magnesium rich anymore. Our soil is really depleted. So even though I'm eating all the right foods, I know I'm not getting the right amount of magnesium. I like to lift weights, so it's really important. Zinc, all of these kind of things. Our environment we don't know how much is in our food anymore. So yeah, supplementing sometimes is useful, but if you eat a wide variety of fruit and vegetables, you're more likely to get to optimal levels of those vitamins and minerals and phytonutrients naturally and retain them in your body. Again, we can't really do experiments on this because it's not ethical always, but there is something about absorption as well and assimilation. We might be taking it, but is it actually doing anything? Are we actually absorbing it, or is it just coming out?
Sorry, on the flip side, like, are we absorbing too much of, because you get very high dosage vitamins now, and people think, you know, oh, if a little bit is good, then more must be better. I'll just like take more and more. And, you know, that can have an actually a negative effect. Whereas you're very unlikely to be able to eat enough fruit and vegetables to sort of overdose on a vitamin
Absolutely.
in,
Well,
like you like if you're only ever eating broccoli, or, you know, maybe a certain vegetable that's extremely high in a certain vitamin, that could potentially be a problem. But if you're having this wide variety, then you sort of negate any of those problems ever coming up.
100%. I think like you got to remember if you're having things like vitamin E, like high supplements, you know, there are cases where it's much more related to, you know, increased risk of lung cancer and stuff like that. You know, so I think and high levels of beta carotene, you know. So again, it's a minefield. I think it's just safer to eat a wide variety of fruit and vegetables. It doesn't have to all be fresh. It can be frozen. It can be like I'm a big fan of jarred roasted peppers because I think they're really yummy. And so there's a whole lot of things that we could do. You know, you don't have to. It doesn't have to be complicated. So just like roast up a load of vegetables at the beginning of the week, and then you've got loads of things to eat.
The fiber thing is quite interesting. I read a study this week, and I'm going to butcher it because I can't really remember exactly what it was, but it was basically, you know, we're kind of always saying, oh, fiber is really good for you. But, you know, exactly why hasn't quite been clear. And they were showing that there's a certain molecule that is created when you eat a lot of fiber, and that was affecting insulin sensitivity. And that's why or it could be one of the reasons why a high fiber diet is especially beneficial to type 2 diabetics. So that was quite interesting.
There's so many things, but high fiber diet is purely because your gut microbiome is working better, and then and for that reason, when your gut microbiome is working better, you're releasing. It really affects all your hormone levels. So with the insulin, and I don't know which pepper you're referring to, I have to be honest, but when your gut microbiome is working better, when the rest of your metabolic kind of metabolism is working better because your hormones are working better, then you're more likely to be able to be less insulin, more insulin sensitive. Sorry, I got that wrong for a second. So I think that's the thing. We forget that our body is so many different systems all together, and anything you do will affect it. Whatever you eat, what you drink. So like for me, when you're drinking sugar, like people think that diet drinks are great for weight loss, but actually your body doesn't really know because they're kind of inert, these aspartame and these sweeteners, and your body doesn't know how to react, and so it actually makes your body become more insulin resistant because your body doesn't really know because it still releases insulin because of the sweet taste, and then it doesn't, and then you've got all this insulin sort of floating around your body, and then obviously if you've got extra insulin, then you lay down extra fat, as you know. So I think it's not just about calories; it's really about what you put into your body. And personally, I use kind of the brown cola kind of stuff to clean the toilet. It's very effective. So what's it doing to my insides?
Yeah, true. Right, so there's a few other things I want to go
Sure.
over, but the question that everyone is wondering is how healthy are avocados?
So do you mean for us or for the environment? So avocados are full of vitamin E. They're good, full of monounsaturated fat. Monounsaturated fat is much better for us. It's much more, I want to say liquid, but it's obviously not when it's an avocado because it's solid, but it's much better for us. But eating an avocado every day is bad for you. There's not just the calories, but it's the amount of fat that you're having. It might be good fat, but again, go back to the olive oil thing. If you're eating too much of it, it's not necessarily good food for you. It's also really bad for the environment. Avocados do not grow in the UK. They're shipped over from somewhere. And so when I think about health, I think about it being in three ways. Is it a win for me and my body? Is it a win? Is it a win? Is it a win for the environment? Is it a win for my long-term health? And that's kind of the way I look at all of those things. So, and again, a variety. If you're eating avocado every day, you're using those calories up when you could be eating 6 different other vegetables or 6 different other nutrients, and maybe having different other forms of monounsaturated fat, which is the good fat. So different nuts and seeds and olive oil and all of those things. And if you're not oily fish, salmon, trout, all of those kind of things, mackerel, herring, you could be having all of those. And I just think that eating too much of one thing is not ideal. Apart from
Yeah. It is just funny because like in fitness it's such a you know, avocado on toast is like the fitness thing and it's all over Instagram, and, you know, avocado's a good fat, and yeah.
But there's so many other things. Why? Remember, fat is essential fatty acids. Those are the things that we cannot make ourselves. So again, we need to have another a huge variety of those. So we have those because that affects our mental health, it affects our cognitive health, and I think it affects basically our membranes, our cell membranes, and how they're made, and essentially how our cells work, because it affects the integrity of them. So that's why it's really important.
Well, this has been really interesting for me as well because I eat a very standard diet, and I think after this conversation, I'm going to try and change it up. I do eat a good variety of fruit and veg, but I'd say, you know, they're good foods that I eat, but, you know, I eat mackerel like every single day because I love it. But maybe
What
I
could you
should be,
swap it for, do you think?
well, other varieties of fish potentially,
Yeah.
or eggs now and again, or, you know, literally anything. But yeah, I guess it's just quick and simple and easy for me, and because I know that I eat it every day, and actually for a lot of people, you know, if they're, you know, if weight loss is the goal, then keeping things pretty samey.
Yeah. But then what you could do, so one of my kind of go-tos with that is I make a frittata once a week with the odds and sods of vegetables. So normally there's like 5 or 6 bits and pieces left of vegetables. I chuck it all into a pan with my eggs, bake it with loads of herbs, and that means you've already got a massive variety. You can weigh and measure it as far as, you know, roughly how much vegetables are, you know, that how much eggs per slice. And that'd be a really good way of getting more fruit and vegetables in and your protein in. Um, and that could be one way of doing it. And that way you're getting variety because you're using it and you're minimizing food waste. So I think that's one of my ideas.
Win.
Yeah, it's a win. It's a win.
So, anything else you want to touch on in terms of sort of the cancer prevention tips, or just anything at all?
So I think with the cancer prevention things, you know, you've got to remember that we can't always prevent cancer. We can reduce the risk, and everyone's different, and everyone's type of cancer might be different. But the thing is, if you eat a healthy diet, keep a healthy weight, don't drink too much alcohol, eat a huge variety of fruit and vegetables, but also whole grains. Whole grains are great. Do you know one of the interesting statistics, and this is not cancer related, but more women are having heart disease now than men, and we can attribute that to the low carb diet because we're eating a lot less whole grains, including oats and things like that. And this means that we're having a lot more heart disease because we're not able to look after our vessels. And this type of heart disease looks very different from the classic heart disease because we've gone at it very slowly, and our vessels are not that. Basically, our blood vessels have to be a little bit stretchy, and they're not, but they become a little bit hardened. But that becomes all over our bodies. If you look at men and they tend to put on fat around their bellies. It's not all over fat. Whereas as women, we often put on body fat around our whole bodies. And so that same thing is happening with our blood vessels. Whereas traditionally men, they fur up their kind of heart blood vessels and the ones that kind of enter their heart and leave their heart. Whereas women, we're just like furring up all our vessels. And so we're having this really insidious and quite scary type of heart disease. So eat your oats. It's really important. But why? I mean, yeah.
The lower carb diet is increasing that
Yes.
from cutting out
Whole grains are so important for heart health and cardiovascular health, and we need it just also for our gut microbiome, but also the way for example, oats and beta glucans and how they help give a little bit of fluidity to our blood vessels and things like that. So I think it's super interesting. They basically affect the glucose and the insulin and things like that. So it's a whole web. It's a long, complicated thing, but we just need to eat a massive variety of foods. I'm not saying we need to have wheat all the time, but we just need to have whole grain. So that could be brown rice. It could be other things.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
that is interesting. Yeah, you're right. It would be a completely different sort of pathology to cardiovascular disease, and I guess the cardiovascular event that you would get from that would be very different as well.
Absolutely, which is why it's hard to tell sometimes that people are having these events and they die. People die. It's crazy.
Well, that's the scariest thing about cardiovascular disease, isn't it? That normally you actually don't know until you have a stroke or a heart attack, and then, you know, you're so far along the line that it's not a great outcome most of the time.
Yeah, you may have damaged some of your, vessels or your heart itself, and obviously if it's at the front of the heart, there's more likely to be permanent damage than the back of the heart. So I think it's, and this is not to be alarmist at all. I think it's eat a wide variety. And yeah, I definitely think that we have to sometimes be. I personally need to be in a calorie deficit right now. Got it. I've got extra body fat to lose. But then how do I do that safely? I have a wide variety of different protein source foods. So I have a lot of fish. And also at the moment it's game season. Game is incredibly lean and it's wild. So I've actually just got some wild venison in the fridge, which I'll be having tomorrow. And it's like so lean, so full of nutrients, a massive variety of fruit and vegetables. And I will have whole grains, but I'll time it and have that around my heavy lifting days, because that's when my body's really gonna need it to repair and grow the muscle fibers. So I think it's about thinking about it, and that's why carbs, like in a way, might be better for our long-term health. I don't know. So
Yeah, like you're saying, these things are so hard to study because there's so many factors that are coming in. You could never do. We can only really look at these sort of epidemiological studies where it's like, you know, you're looking in hindsight over a very long period of time and the events that happened, rather than like a controlled study, which for nutrition is so hard to do.
it's so hard to do. I mean, there are studies, especially when you're trying certain vitamins or placebos and things like that, but you know, it shouldn't be complicated. I think we've made eating very complicated now. So let's just try and eat a lot more. I mean, half your plate, fruit and vegetables, and then you'll be in a calorie deficit anyway, because by the time you chew through all of that, you'll be quite full.
Yeah.
Bit of protein, bit of good fat.
Sheer volume of food that trying to get in your 30 fruit and vegetables a week, a variety, like the sheer volume of food that you're going to have to eat, it's going to probably help you be in a deficit without even having to track
Exactly.
or having to
They
take
fill
calories.
you up. The fiber fills you up, and then some really good quality lean protein with it, or some nice oily fish, and you're kind of good. And obviously for vegetarians, there's so many different types of things, like, you know, tofu and like all sorts of things that you can have. So tempeh and, you know, so I think it's about almost simplifying a little bit, but then having as much variety within that simplification, if that makes sense.
That is the perfect way to finish. And thank you so much